Molly was typically known to be bright and cheerful. Today, however, she was very cross. It had been a horrible day for her. First, when she was filling up on coal, Diesel shunted her underneath the coal chute, and her beautiful yellow paint was covered in coal dust. Next, an old tree fell onto the tracks as Molly was taking some passengers to Dryall Station and nearly crashed into it. After that, some naughty boys threw mud pies at Molly. Finally, while she was at the docks, Cranky dropped a large crate of fish onto Molly. Accidentally, of course. That evening, she was on her way to the washdown, but as she was approaching Maithwaite Station, the station master flagged her down. "Sorry, Molly," he said. "There's been a derailment. You have to wait here for a while." That was the final straw for Molly. She was so cross, she wheezed angrily. "My goodness," said a voice. "Your day must have been a difficult one." Molly was startled. On the platform was an elderly woman. "It was the worst," sighed Molly. "I'm beginning to believe that I'm very unlucky." "You unlucky? Don't be absurd. You know what I see? I see a friendly, assiduous engine with a smile bright as the sun." That made Molly feel better. "My name is Molly. It's a pleasure to meet you, Molly. I'm Scarlett Robinson. Thanks for cheering me up. It's no trouble at all. Whenever I see someone down in the dumps, I want to cheer them up. By the way, would you mind telling me what you think of this station? Looks grand, isn't it? It's my favorite station. There were some times in my life when my husband and I would come here to wave to the engines passing by. It does look nice." The fact that someone had a favorite station seemed rather strange to Molly. "I must be going, Molly. I'll see you on another day. Always remember to keep a positive attitude throughout your life. There are some good days coming your way very soon." Mrs. Robinson turned and walked away. No sooner than Mrs. Robinson left, the station master walked up to Molly. "Right, Molly, the mess is cleared up. You can go now." With a whoosh of steam, Molly set off towards the washdown. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to see Molly. "Would you like to pull the express today? Gordon is at the works getting fitted with a new boiler, James is ill, and Henry is getting repainted." Molly was delighted. "Yes, please, sir." Molly arrived at Nafford Station. The passengers and coaches were happy to see Molly. It wasn't long before the guard blew his whistle and Molly chuffed away. Come along, said Molly. We're coming along, said the coaches. Molly had a wonderful time. As a result, many individuals took photographs of her in the process of giving passengers a pleasant ride. Molly was feeling content as she pulled up to Maithwaite Station, ready to share her day's adventures with Mrs. Robinson. Sounds to me that you need to pull the express permanently, laughed Mrs. Robinson, and Gordon should pull dirty goods trains. I don't think Gordon would like that, laughed Molly. I wanted to take a moment to thank you for your kind words yesterday. You were right. Today was amazing. I'm so happy that I met you. Mrs. Robinson smiled. You're welcome, Molly. I'm glad I met you too. Remember, if you're ever feeling blue, you have a friend to talk to. Molly smiled and steamed away happily, knowing that she had someone to turn to in times of need. Molly was on her way back to her shed when she saw Toby. I heard about your run today. You did an amazing job and truly performed flawlessly. It was a sight to behold. Gordon, Henry, and James are going to be very jealous of you. Thank you, Toby, smiled Molly. Mrs. Robinson's words really cheered me up. Toby went pale. Mrs. Robinson? As in Scarlett Robinson? Why, yes, smiled Molly. Molly, Mrs. Robinson is no longer with us. She died a long time ago. Molly stared. But it can't be true. I just talked with her, and she cheered me up after yesterday. We laughed and joked around, and she was full of positivity. That's hard to believe, Molly. You could have been conversing with a ghost. Molly was silent for a moment. I'm going to need a second opinion, she said. Toby sighed. She'll believe me soon enough. Toby was determined that Molly will find out the truth, no matter how long it took. Meanwhile, Molly was asking Harvey about Mrs. Robinson. Sorry, Molly, he said. That name doesn't sound familiar to me. Maybe someone else knows. It's worth a try. Thanks anyway, Harvey, Molly sighed. Molly decided to ask Derek. Sorry, Molly, said Derek. I've never met Mrs. Robinson. Molly sighed heavily and set off to ask someone else. Oh, my dear, Elizabeth said. I'm so sorry. I was left in the shed for years, so I never had the chance to meet Scarlett Robinson. I'm sure she must be an extraordinary person. Molly was getting very irritated. There must be someone else who remembers Scarlett Robinson, huffed Molly. Scarlett Robinson? We haven't heard that name in years. Molly came to a sudden stop. How long do you remember Mrs. Robinson? Asked Molly. Oh, years and years, replied Percy. She always had something nice to say. Just like Mrs. Kindly, added Thomas. Is she still alive? Asked Molly hesitantly. No, Molly, Thomas said sadly. She's long gone, Percy added. Molly was lost for words. She became very pale. Toby pulled alongside. Toby, what happened to her? Asked Molly. Toby sighed. Why don't you ask her yourself? I will be glad to come with you if you want me to. Yes, Toby, said Molly. I would like that. That night, Molly and Toby were heading to Maithwaite Station. Molly was extremely quiet. After all, it was quite shocking to hear that Mrs. Robinson was a ghost. Mrs. Robinson was waiting for them. At last, Toby and Molly arrived at Maithwaite. Mrs. Robinson, said Toby, it's been a long time. Mrs. Robinson smiled at Toby. Then she looked at Molly. I guess you know the truth. Why didn't you tell me? Asked Molly. I didn't want to frighten you, explained Mrs. Robinson. I knew it would be difficult for you, so I thought it was best to wait. Molly completely understood. Please tell me what happened. Mrs. Robinson sighed deeply as she recounted the story. It was many years ago. I was waiting for my train at the station when a shifty figure approached me. He had a menacing look in his eyes, and I could tell immediately that he was up to no good. He demanded for my purse, but I refused. He tried to grab it, but I held on tightly. He yanked on it, trying to pull it away from me, but I refused to give in. My grip was strong, and I was determined to keep my purse safe. He kept pulling at it, but I wouldn't let go. But I didn't know that he had a companion with him, and in his hand was a knife. He came up behind me and stabbed me. I lay on the ground while the robbers were trying to get away, but were stopped by an off-duty police officer. I was in dire need of medical assistance when the ambulance was called, but it arrived too late. Molly was utterly shocked. You were murdered? How could anyone hurt a kind and gentle soul like you? There aren't many people who can be sweet and caring like me. Even though you are a ghost, said Molly, I'm glad that I met you." Mrs. Robinson smiled warmly at Molly. "It has been a pleasure meeting you, Molly," she said. Mrs. Robinson was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I believe it is time for me to move on. My friends and family are waiting for me in heaven." Molly's face fell as she realized she wouldn't get to spend any more time with Mrs. Robinson. "Don't be sad, Molly. I'll still watch over you in heaven." A tear fell from Molly's cheek and landed on the track. "Mrs. Robinson, I will miss you." "Remember, Molly, always keep your chin up." Just like that, Mrs. Robinson vanished. "Even though I met her yesterday, she was an incredible woman." "She was remarkable," said Toby. Molly thought of Mrs. Robinson often, and although she was gone, Molly felt like she was still watching over her. Mrs. Robinson had been a kind ghost, but Molly hoped that she wouldn't encounter another one.